On a hot, still morning, a caregiver walks down a dusty street pushing a baby stroller. She stops beside a vacant lot to answer her cell phone, not noticing the fixed gaze of the 2-year-old child. The baby stretches out its arm and insistently points to a pile of debris covered with tarps. The woman, annoyed, looks without understanding, but something under the tarp trembles slightly. Hesitantly, she approaches and pulls the darkened plastic with a branch. Two sunken eyes stare in silence. Under sacks and old furniture, a dog of visible bones doesn't move, and for a second, everything stopped. Love stories with animals. Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now, back to our story. The oppressive August heat pressed down on Cedar Falls like a heavy blanket, making even the simplest tasks feel exhausting. Sarah Mitchell pushed the worn baby stroller along Maple Street, her sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust from the cracked sidewalk. The old neighborhood had seen better days, with its faded Victorian houses and overgrown lots serving as reminders of more prosperous times. She was making her usual route from Henderson's Market back to the small rental house where she had been caring for 20-month-old Tommy Brennan for the past 6 months. Tommy's parents had hired Sarah after his mother, Jennifer, returned to her demanding job at the regional hospital, and his father, Mark, took on extra shifts at the construction company to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous work, but Sarah genuinely loved spending time with the curious toddler who seemed to notice everything around him with wide, intelligent eyes. The Nokia in her pocket buzzed insistently, interrupting her thoughts about what to prepare for Tommy's lunch. She glanced at the caller ID and saw Jennifer's name, probably checking in about Tommy's morning, as she did every day around this time. Sarah pulled the stroller to a stop near the rusted chain-link fence that bordered the notorious vacant lot on Elm Street. "Hello, Mrs. Brennan," Sarah answered, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder while keeping one hand on the stroller handle. "Hi, Sarah. I just wanted to check how Tommy's morning went. Did he eat his cereal okay?" As Jennifer's voice filled her ear with the usual maternal concerns, Sarah barely noticed Tommy had shifted in his stroller. The little boy, who had been contentedly clutching his favorite stuffed elephant, suddenly straightened up with an alertness that caught Sarah's peripheral attention. Yes, he ate most of it, though he did try to feed some to Mr. Elephant again. Sarah chuckled into the phone, but her smile faded as she watched Tommy's behavior change completely. The toddler had turned his entire body toward the vacant lot, his small arm extending with a determination that seemed unusual for someone who had barely begun speaking in 2-word sentences. His index finger pointed steadily at the jumbled mess of discarded furniture, old appliances, and construction debris that had accumulated over the years. "Dare! Dare!" Tommy called out with urgency, his voice carrying a tone Sarah had never heard before. It wasn't his usual excited babble when he spotted a dog or a colorful truck. This was different, more insistent, almost desperate. "Sorry, Mrs. Brennan." Tommy's pointing at something. "Can I call you back in a few minutes?" "Of course, dear. Give him a kiss from Mommy." Sarah ended the call and crouched down beside the stroller to follow Tommy's gaze. The vacant lot was exactly what she expected to see, the same eyesore that had plagued the neighborhood for as long as anyone could remember. Rusted appliances, moldy mattresses, broken furniture, and countless black garbage bags created a landscape of abandonment that most residents had learned to ignore. "What is it, sweetheart? What do you see?" Sarah asked gently, though she felt slightly foolish, talking to a child who could barely respond in complete sentences. Tommy's pointing became more emphatic, his little body straining against the stroller straps as if he wanted to climb out and investigate himself. "Dare! Dare! Go dare!" The urgency in his voice sent an unexpected chill down Sarah's spine. In all her months of caring for Tommy, she had never seen him react this way to anything. He was typically a calm, observant child who was content to point out birds, cars, or other children with mild interest. This intensity was completely out of character. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself studying the lot more carefully. The summer heat had intensified the smell of decay and neglect that emanated from the pile of refuse. Most neighbors crossed to the other side of the street when walking past, and children were strictly forbidden from playing anywhere near the area. There had been talk for years about cleaning it up, but somehow it never happened. The city claimed it was private property, and the supposed owner was never available for comment. Tommy's insistence didn't waver. If anything, his urgency seemed to increase as moments passed. Sarah glanced around the empty street, feeling slightly ridiculous, but unable to ignore the child's persistent behavior. Something deep in her caretaker's instincts told her to pay attention. "Okay, Tommy, let's take a closer look," she said, though every practical part of her mind screamed that this was a terrible idea. She pushed the stroller closer to the fence, staying on the sidewalk but moving near enough to get a better view of whatever had captured Tommy's attention. The lot was even more depressing up close. Whoever had been dumping things here had done so without any regard for organization or safety. Broken glass glinted dangerously among the debris, and she could see evidence of small animals having made homes in the darker recesses of the pile. Tommy continued pointing, but now Sarah noticed his focus seemed concentrated on a specific area toward the back of the lot, where a collection of old tarps and canvas covers created a makeshift shelter against what looked like an overturned refrigerator. That's when she saw it, the slightest movement beneath one of the grey tarps. So subtle that she almost convinced herself she had imagined it, but Tommy's reaction suggested otherwise. The little boy had somehow noticed something that had escaped the attention of everyone else who had walked past this location for months, possibly years. Sarah's heart began beating faster as she realized she was facing a decision that could change everything about this ordinary Tuesday morning. Every reasonable part of her mind urged her to continue their walk home. Give Tommy his lunch and forget about whatever might be hidden in that pile of garbage. But the child's unwavering insistence, combined with her own growing sense that something important was happening, made it impossible to simply walk away. She pulled out her phone again, not to call anyone, but to activate the flashlight function. The bright LED beam cut through the shadows cast by the overhanging tarps, and what she saw made her gasp audibly. 2 eyes, unmistakably alive, looking directly back at her from beneath the makeshift shelter. They weren't human eyes, but they were filled with an intelligence and sadness that struck Sarah like a physical blow. Dark brown, almost black, set in what appeared to be the face of a large dog. The animal didn't move, didn't make a sound, but simply stared at her with an expression that seemed to convey both hope and resignation. Tommy had somehow known. This barely walking toddler had sensed the presence of a living creature that everyone else had missed. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing and what she should do about it. The dog, whatever breed it might be, appeared to be trapped or hiding in the debris. From what little she could see, it looked to be in poor condition, possibly injured or sick. This wasn't a situation she could handle alone, especially not with Tommy in her care. But as she stood there, staring into those eyes that seemed to plead for help, Sarah knew that walking away was no longer an option. Tommy had led her to this discovery for a reason, and now it was up to her to figure out what came next. The morning sun continued to beat down mercilessly, but Sarah barely noticed the heat anymore. Her entire focus had narrowed to those eyes in the shadows and the growing certainty that this moment would mark the beginning of something much larger than either she or Tommy could have possibly imagined. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she realized the magnitude of what Tommy had led her to discover. The dog's eyes never left hers, and she could see now that the animal was breathing in shallow, labored gasps. Whatever condition it was in, time was clearly a factor. She needed help, and she needed it quickly. Looking around the deserted street, Sarah spotted old Mr. Henderson from the market walking toward his truck parked across the street. Frank Henderson had lived in Cedar Falls his entire 72 years and knew everyone in the neighborhood. If anyone would know how to handle this situation, it would be him. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, waving her arm to get his attention while keeping the other hand firmly on Tommy's stroller. Frank looked up, squinting against the bright sun, and ambled over with the unhurried pace of a man who had seen everything life could throw at him. "Morning, Sarah. Everything all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." "There's a dog in there," Sarah said, pointing toward the vacant lot. "A big dog. It looks like it's in bad shape. And I don't think it can get out on its own." Frank's weathered face creased into a frown as he approached the fence. He was a practical man who didn't make decisions lightly, but he also had a soft spot for animals that everyone in the neighborhood knew about. His own golden retriever, Buddy, had been a rescue from a similar situation years ago. "Where exactly?" he asked, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket and peering into the debris. Sarah used her phone's flashlight again, directing the beam toward the spot where she had seen the eyes. This time, more of the animal was visible. It was definitely a large dog, with the distinctive coloring and ear shape of a German shepherd. Its fur was matted and dirty, and even from their position outside the fence, they could see that the animal was severely underweight. "Sweet Jesus," Frank muttered under his breath. "How long do you suppose it's been in there?" Before Sarah could respond, Tommy began pointing again with renewed urgency. "Doggy! Help, doggy!" The clarity of his words surprised both adults. Tommy rarely spoke in complete phrases, but something about this situation seemed to have unlocked a new level of communication for the little boy. "He's right," Frank said, his tone becoming more decisive. "We can't leave it there, but we're going to need more hands. That animal is probably scared and might bite if it feels cornered. German shepherds are powerful dogs even when they're healthy." Frank pulled out an old flip phone and made a quick call to his neighbor, Pete Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down and worked as a maintenance supervisor at the local school district. Pete had experience with animals and access to equipment that might prove useful. While they waited for Pete to arrive, Sarah tried to keep Tommy calm and engaged while also monitoring the dog's condition. The animal hadn't moved from its position under the tarp, but its eyes remained alert and focused on them. There was something almost human-like in its gaze, as if it understood that help had finally arrived. "Has anyone ever reported a missing German shepherd in the area?" Sarah asked Frank, though she realized the question might be futile given how long the dog appeared to have been in this condition. Frank scratched his grey beard thoughtfully. "Not that I recall, but you know how it is around here. People come and go, and not everyone reports when their pets go missing. Could be someone moved away and left it behind, or maybe it wandered off from somewhere else entirely." Pete Rodriguez arrived within minutes, carrying a thick blanket, some rope, and a large carrier that he used for transporting his own dogs to the veterinarian. He was a compact man in his 50s with gentle hands and a calm demeanor that seemed to have a soothing effect on animals. "Frank filled me in on the phone," Pete said, already assessing the situation with professional efficiency. "We need to be careful here. That dog is probably dehydrated and malnourished, which means it might be unpredictable. But leaving it there isn't an option." The 3 adults worked out a plan while Tommy watched with fascination from his stroller. Pete would enter the lot first, approaching the dog slowly while Frank and Sarah kept watch. If the animal seemed receptive, they would try to coax it out with some food that Frank had brought from his market. If it appeared aggressive or too frightened, they would call animal control for professional assistance. Pete carefully navigated through the debris, moving slowly and speaking in soft, reassuring tones. "Easy there, buddy. We're here to help, Nobody's going to hurt you." As he got closer, the full extent of the dog's condition became visible. The German Shepherd was clearly a male, probably around 5 or 6 years old, but his ribs were showing through his matted coat, and his muscles had atrophied from malnutrition. Most heartbreaking of all, his tail remained tucked beneath him, and his ears were flat against his head, in a posture of complete submission and fear. "He's been here a while," Pete called back quietly. "This didn't happen overnight. Someone either abandoned him here, or he's been lost for months." When Pete extended his hand toward the dog, the animal didn't growl or snap. Instead, he pressed himself further back into his makeshift shelter, as if trying to become invisible. It was a reaction that spoke of prolonged trauma rather than natural animal aggression. "He's scared, but he's not aggressive," Pete reported. "I think we can get him out, but we need to move slowly." Using pieces of the lunch meat that Frank had brought, Pete managed to coax the dog forward inch by inch. It was a painstaking process that took nearly 40 minutes, but eventually the German Shepherd emerged from his hiding place, moving with the cautious steps of an animal that had learned not to trust easily. The sight of him in full daylight was even more shocking than Sarah had expected. His coat, which should have been thick and lustrous, hung in dirty mats. His eyes, while alert, were sunken with dehydration. Most telling of all, he moved with the careful gait of an animal that had learned to conserve every ounce of energy. Tommy had remained unusually quiet during the entire rescue operation. But as soon as the dog was safely secured in Pete's carrier, the little boy began clapping his hands together. "Doggy safe, doggy safe." The adults exchanged glances, all thinking the same thing. Somehow this toddler had known exactly where to look and had been more insistent about helping than any of them initially understood. Frank had already called ahead to Dr. Lisa Chen at the Cedar Falls Animal Clinic, a small practice that operated largely on donations and volunteer work. Dr. Chen had agreed to see the dog immediately, despite it being her lunch break. As they loaded the carrier into Pete's truck, Sarah found herself wondering about the dog's history. He was clearly purebred, with the classic markings and bone structure of a well-bred German Shepherd. This wasn't a stray that had always lived on the streets. Someone had cared for this animal once. Someone had trained him, fed him, probably loved him. But how had he ended up abandoned in a vacant lot? And why had no one noticed until Tommy's mysterious insistence brought him to their attention? The drive to the animal clinic was tense, with all 3 adults acutely aware that they might be racing against time. The dog had remained calm during the transfer, but his breathing was still labored and his condition appeared critical. Dr. Chen was waiting for them when they arrived, along with her assistant, Maria Santos. The clinic was small but well-equipped, with examination rooms that smelled of antiseptic and the quiet efficiency that comes from years of caring for animals in crisis. "Let's get him inside immediately," Dr. Chen said, after one look at the dog's condition. "From what Frank described on the phone, we're dealing with severe malnutrition and possibly dehydration. We need to run some tests and get him stabilized before we can think about anything else." As they transferred the German Shepherd to an examination table, Sarah noticed something that made her heart skip. Around the dog's neck, barely visible beneath his matted fur, was a thin collar with what appeared to be a small tag or identification chip. "Doctor," she said, pointing to the collar, "there's something there. It might tell us who he belongs to." "Doctor." Chen carefully examined the collar, her expression growing more interested as she worked. "It's not just a tag," she said finally. "This dog has a microchip. If it's still readable, we might be able to trace his registration and find out exactly who he belongs to and how he ended up in that lot." Sarah looked down at Tommy, who was watching the proceedings with the same intense focus he had shown when pointing toward the vacant lot. The little boy seemed to understand that something important was happening, something that went far beyond a simple animal rescue. As Dr. Chen prepared to scan the microchip, Sarah realized that Tommy's mysterious insistence had set in motion a chain of events that might reveal secrets no one in Cedar Falls had ever expected to uncover. Dr. Chen's scanner beeped softly as she ran it over the small chip embedded beneath the German Shepherd's skin. The device's screen flickered for a moment before displaying a series of numbers that would unlock the first piece of the puzzle surrounding this mysterious animal. "Got it," Dr. Chen announced, jotting down the identification number. "Let me access the registry database." Sarah held Tommy a bit closer as they waited, the little boy having grown quieter, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Frank and Pete stood nearby, their faces reflecting the same mixture of curiosity and concern that Sarah felt building in her chest. The computer screen filled with information as Dr. Chen navigated through the pet registry database. Her expression shifted from professional concentration to surprise, then to something approaching confusion. "This is interesting," she said slowly, reading the data that had appeared on her screen. "The dog's name is Rex, and he's registered to a Dorothy Harrison of 847 Elm Street here in Cedar Falls. But according to this, the registration was last updated over 2 years ago." Frank's eyebrows shot up in recognition. Dorothy Harrison. I knew Dorothy, sweet old lady, who used to come into the market every Tuesday for her groceries. She passed away. Oh, it must be going on 2 years now. I remember because it was right around Christmas time. That explains a lot, Pete said grimly, but it raises even more questions. What happened to Rex after Dorothy passed? Someone should have taken care of him. Dr. Chen continued reading through the database information. There's an emergency contact listed here, an Emma Harrison, with a phone number that has a different area code. Could be a relative. Sarah's mind was racing. Dorothy Harrison's house was only 3 blocks from where they had found Rex, right here on Elm Street. If the dog had belonged to a woman who lived so close by, how had he ended up abandoned in that vacant lot? And where had he been for the past 2 years? "Should we try calling the emergency contact?" Maria suggested from across the room, where she was preparing IV fluids for Rex's treatment. Dr. Chen nodded and dialed the number listed in the database. The phone rang several times before a woman's voice answered, sounding slightly out of breath. "Hello? Hello? This is Dr. Lisa Chen from the Cedar Falls Animal Clinic in Iowa. I'm calling because we have a German Shepherd here named Rex, who's registered with your contact information. Are you Emma Harrison?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When the woman spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Rex? You found Rex? But that's impossible. Rex was my grandmother's dog. She passed away 2 years ago, and I was told that Rex had been adopted by a lovely family right after the funeral. I live in Chicago now, and I couldn't take him at the time because of my apartment situation." Dr. Chen exchanged glances with the others in the room. "Ma'am, I'm afraid that's not what happened. We found Rex today in extremely poor condition, hidden in a vacant lot. He appears to have been abandoned for quite some time." The silence that followed was so profound that Dr. Chen checked to make sure the call hadn't been disconnected. Finally, Emma's voice came through, shaky with emotion. "That can't be right. My grandmother's neighbor, Harold Winters, told me he had found Rex a good home with a family who had children. He said they were so happy to have him. I sent money for his care during the transition." Frank stepped forward and gestured for Dr. Chen to put the call on speaker. "Ma'am, this is Frank Henderson. I knew your grandmother well. She was a regular customer at my market. Can you tell me more about this Harold Winters? He was the man who owned the property next to my grandmother's house. He seemed nice enough when I met him during the funeral arrangements. He said he knew people who were looking for a dog like Rex, and since I couldn't take him to Chicago, it seemed like the perfect solution." Pete's expression darkened as he processed this information. Everyone in the neighborhood knew about Harold Winters, though not necessarily for positive reasons. He was a man in his 60s who owned several properties in the area, including the vacant lot where Rex had been found. Harold was known for his short temper and his habit of disappearing for months at a time without explanation. "Emma," Frank said carefully, "Harold Winters owns the lot where we found Rex. He's been gone from the neighborhood for several months now, and that property has been abandoned." The gasp that came through the phone speaker was audible to everyone in the room. "You're telling me that Rex has been living in that man's vacant lot this whole time? That he never found him a family?" Dr. Chen took over the conversation, her voice gentle but direct. "Emma, I think you need to understand the full situation. Rex is severely malnourished and shows signs of long-term neglect. Whatever happened after your grandmother passed away, this dog has been surviving on his own for quite some time." "I'm coming back to Cedar Falls," Emma said immediately, her voice strong with determination. "Rex was my grandmother's most precious companion. She would be devastated to know what happened to him. I should have checked on the arrangement instead of just trusting Harold's word." After providing Dr. Chen with her contact information and promising to drive down from Chicago the next day, Emma ended the call. The clinic fell silent, except for the quiet sounds of Rex's labored breathing and the hum of medical equipment. Sarah looked down at Tommy, who had been unusually attentive during the entire phone conversation, almost as if he understood the significance of what was being discussed. The little boy was staring at Rex with the same intense focus he had shown when pointing toward the vacant lot. "This is more complicated than a simple rescue," Dr. Chen said, beginning to examine Rex more thoroughly. "We have a dog who was apparently abandoned by someone who was supposed to find him a home. An owner who believed he had been properly rehomed, and now a potential custody situation." Maria approached with the IV setup. "How is his condition, doctor?" Dr. Chen's examination revealed the full extent of Rex's ordeal. Besides the obvious malnutrition and dehydration, he had several small wounds that had healed poorly, indicating he had been injured and unable to receive proper care. His teeth showed excessive wear, suggesting he had been eating whatever he could find to survive. "He's going to need several days of careful treatment," Dr. Chen announced. "Refeeding syndrome is a real concern with malnutrition. This severe, we have to restore his health gradually." "What about this Emma woman?" Pete asked. "Does she have a legal claim to the dog?" Frank scratched his beard thoughtfully. "That's a good question. If Dorothy left Rex to her in her will, that's one thing. But if Harold was supposed to arrange an adoption and money changed hands, that complicates matters." Sarah found herself thinking about the larger implications of the situation. Rex had clearly suffered because of someone's negligence or worse. But now there were questions about his future that went beyond simple veterinary care. "There's something else we need to consider," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Rex is showing signs of significant psychological trauma. Even after we restore his physical health, he's going to need careful rehabilitation. Whoever ends up caring for him will need to understand that he's been through something that will affect his behavior and trust issues." As if responding to his name, Rex lifted his head slightly and looked directly at Tommy. For the first time since they had found him, the dog's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but a recognition of some sort. Tommy immediately reached toward Rex. His small hand extended in the universal gesture of friendship that children seem to instinctively understand. "Nice doggy," he said softly, the clearest sentence any of them had heard him speak. The moment was interrupted by Dr. Chen's phone ringing. She answered quickly, her expression growing more serious as she listened to the caller. "That was the Cedar Falls Police Department," she announced after ending the call. "Apparently, a word about Rex has gotten around town, and someone has called in with information about Harold Winters. Officer Martinez wants to speak with whoever found the dog." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What had started as a simple animal rescue was clearly becoming something much more complex, with implications that none of them had anticipated. As she looked at Tommy, still reaching toward Rex with innocent determination, Sarah realized that the little boy's mysterious insistence had uncovered more than just an abandoned animal. They had stumbled onto a story that involved broken promises, family secrets, and a man who had apparently vanished just when his actions were about to catch up with him. The question now was not just about saving Rex, but about uncovering the truth of what had really happened to Dorothy Harrison's beloved companion and ensuring that justice was served for the suffering he had endured. Emma Harrison arrived in Cedar Falls the following evening, driving a silver Honda Civic with Illinois plates and carrying herself with the determined energy of someone on a mission. Sarah had agreed to meet her at the animal clinic, partly out of curiosity about the woman who claimed to be Rex's rightful owner, and partly because Tommy had been asking about the doggy every few hours since their discovery. Dr. Chen had warned them that Rex's condition, while stable, remained serious. The German Shepherd had responded well to the IV fluids and controlled feeding, but he remained withdrawn and defensive with most people. The one exception had been during Tommy's brief visits, when Rex showed the first signs of what might eventually become trust again. Emma Harrison was not what Sarah had expected. She was a woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that held both intelligence and determination. Her clothing was casual but professional, suggesting someone who had left a demanding job to make this unexpected trip. Most striking was the way her composure cracked the moment she saw Rex lying in the clinic's recovery area. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, her hand covering her mouth as she took in the dog's emaciated condition. "Rex, is that really you?" Rex raised his head at the sound of his name, and for a moment his ears perked forward with what might have been recognition. But instead of the joyful reunion one might expect, the dog pressed himself lower in his bed, as if trying to disappear. "He doesn't remember me," Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. "Or maybe he does. And he associates me with being abandoned." Dr. Chen approached carefully. "Emma, I need you to understand that Rex has been through significant trauma. His reaction doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't remember you. It means he's learned not to trust situations that might lead to disappointment or abandonment." Sarah watched the interaction with fascination, holding Tommy on her hip as the little boy observed Rex with his characteristic intensity. There was something about the dynamic between Emma and Rex that didn't quite fit the narrative of a beloved pet being reunited with family. Officer Martinez arrived just as Emma was attempting to coax Rex into acknowledging her presence. Carlos Martinez was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had been with the Cedar Falls Police Department for over 15 years. He had volunteered to handle the case personally because animal welfare issues were among his specialties. "Ms. Harrison," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Officer Martinez. I understand you have some information about Harold Winters and this dog situation." Emma straightened, her emotional response to seeing Rex giving way to a more businesslike demeanor. "Yes, and I have questions about what happened to Rex after my grandmother's funeral. Harold Winters told me he had found Rex a good home, but clearly that wasn't true." Officer Martinez pulled out a notebook and began asking questions that revealed the complexity of the situation. As the conversation progressed, it became clear that the arrangement between Emma and Harold had been entirely informal, with no written agreements or documentation of Rex's transfer. "So you gave Mr. Winters money to facilitate Rex's adoption?" Officer Martinez asked. $300, Emma confirmed. He said it would cover Rex's vaccination updates and help with the transition to his new family. I thought I was being responsible by ensuring Rex would be properly cared for." Sarah found herself wondering about the details that weren't being discussed. If Emma had cared enough about Rex to send money for his welfare, why hadn't she checked on the arrangement later? And why had she been so quick to assume that someone else could provide better care than she could? Dr. Chen joined the conversation with an update on Rex's medical condition. He's responding to treatment, but I need to be honest about his psychological state. This dog has been traumatized by abandonment and neglect. Even after his physical recovery, he's going to need specialized care from someone who understands how to rebuild trust with an animal that has learned to expect disappointment. I want to take him back to Chicago with me, Emma said immediately. Rex belongs with family, and I should have insisted on that from the beginning instead of letting Harold convince me otherwise. It's not that simple, Dr. Chen replied gently. Rex needs stability and consistency, a move to a new city, a new environment, new people that's potentially very stressful for an animal in his condition. Officer Martinez looked up from his notes. There's another complication, Mrs. Harrison. We've been trying to locate Harold Winters to question him about this situation, but he seems to have disappeared from Cedar Falls several months ago. His properties have been abandoned, and no one has seen him since early spring. The room fell silent as the implications of this information sank in. Rex had apparently been left to survive on his own when Harold disappeared, with no one checking on his welfare or ensuring his continued care. Tommy chose that moment to wiggle in Sarah's arms, indicating he wanted to be put down. Against her better judgment, Sarah lowered him to the floor, staying close as he approached Rex's recovery area with his characteristic determination. "Careful, Tommy," she warned. But the little boy was already moving with the confident steps of someone who knew exactly what he intended to do. Rex watched Tommy's approach with more alertness than he had shown since arriving at the clinic. As the toddler came within reach, Rex slowly stretched his neck forward and gently touched his nose to Tommy's outstretched hand. "Doggy, better," Tommy announced with satisfaction, as if he had personally confirmed Rex's improvement. Emma stared at the interaction with surprise. "He won't let me near him. But he's fine with the child he just met. Children don't carry the same emotional baggage that adults do," Dr. Chen explained. To Rex, Tommy represents something uncomplicated and safe. Adults, especially adults who might remind him of being abandoned, are more threatening right now. Sarah felt a strange protective instinct rising in her chest as she watched Tommy gently pat Rex's head. The bond between the little boy and the dog was undeniable, and it raised questions about what would be best for Rex's recovery. "Ms. Harrison," Officer Martinez said, "I need to ask some difficult questions about your grandmother's estate and her intentions regarding Rex." Emma's expression became guarded. "What kind of questions? Did Dorothy Harrison leave a will? Was there any legal documentation about Rex's care after her passing?" "There was a will," Emma admitted reluctantly, "but it was complicated. There were some family disputes about the estate, and I didn't inherit the house or most of her belongings. That's part of why I couldn't take Rex at the time. I was dealing with legal challenges and living in a small apartment that didn't allow pets." Sarah sensed there was more to this story than Emma was revealing. The tension in the woman's voice suggested that the family disputes had been more serious than she was letting on. "Doctor." Jen checked her watch and made a decision that surprised everyone. "I think Rex needs to stay here for at least another week, regardless of who ultimately takes custody. His physical recovery is progressing, but I want to monitor his psychological adaptation as well. That will give everyone time to sort out the legal and practical issues." "But I've driven all the way from Chicago," Emma protested. "I have to get back to work." "Rex's well-being has to be the priority," Dr. Chen said firmly. "He's been through enough trauma. We're not going to add to it by rushing decisions about his future." Officer Martinez closed his notebook and looked around the room. I'm going to continue investigating Harold Winters' whereabouts and his handling of this situation. In the meantime, I suggest everyone involved think carefully about what arrangement would truly be in this dog's best interests. As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself in an unexpected position. She had simply been doing her job as Tommy's caregiver when the situation began, but now she felt deeply invested in Rex's recovery and future. More importantly, she couldn't ignore the special connection that had developed between Tommy and Rex. Emma approached Sarah as they prepared to leave the clinic. The little boy seems to have a real connection with Rex. Is he your son? No, I'm his caregiver, Sarah explained, but Tommy was the one who found Rex. Somehow he knew exactly where to look. Emma studied Tommy with new interest. That's remarkable. Rex was always good with children when he lived with my grandmother. Maybe that's something that survived despite everything he's been through. As they walked to their cars, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the real story of what had happened to Rex was still hidden beneath the surface. Emma's explanations felt incomplete. Officer Martinez's investigation was just beginning, and Harold Winters remained mysteriously absent from a situation he had helped create. But most troubling of all was the growing certainty that Rex's future would be decided by adults who might not fully understand what he needed to heal from the trauma he had endured. Only Tommy seemed to have an intuitive grasp of how to reach the broken trust that lay beneath Rex's defensive exterior. The question was whether the adults involved would be wise enough to recognize that sometimes the most unexpected solutions are the ones that serve everyone's best interests. A week had passed since Rex's discovery, and his physical recovery had progressed remarkably well under Dr. Chen's careful supervision. The German Shepherd had gained weight, his coat was beginning to show its natural luster, and his energy levels were slowly returning to normal. However, his psychological recovery remained a delicate process, with trust issues that seemed to run deeper than anyone had initially understood. The most significant development had been Rex's growing attachment to Tommy. The little boy visited the clinic every day with Sarah, and during these visits, Rex showed a side of his personality that had remained hidden from all the adults trying to help him. With Tommy, Rex was gentle, playful, and increasingly protective. He would position himself between the toddler and any adults in the room, as if he had appointed himself as Tommy's guardian. Dr. Chen had decided that Rex was healthy enough for short walks outside the clinic, but only under supervision and only with people he had begun to trust. Sarah had volunteered to help with these walks, partly because Rex seemed more comfortable with her presence, and partly because she was genuinely curious about how the dog would react to being back in the neighborhood where he had been found. The first walk had been unremarkable, with Rex staying close to Sarah and showing mild interest in his surroundings. But as they approached the area near the vacant lot where he had been discovered, Rex's behavior changed dramatically. His ears perked forward, his body tensed, and he began pulling toward the lot with an urgency that reminded Sarah of Tommy's original insistence. "Easy, boy," Sarah said, trying to understand what was causing Rex's agitation. "What is it? What do you want to show me?" Officer Martinez had asked Sarah to call him if Rex showed any unusual behavior during his walks, particularly if it seemed related to the location where he had been found. Martinez's investigation into Harold Winters had revealed some disturbing information. Harold owed money to several people in town, had been involved in disputes with family members, and had left Cedar Falls abruptly after closing out his bank accounts. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Officer Martinez while Rex continued to strain toward the vacant lot. "Officer Martinez, it's Sarah Mitchell. I'm walking Rex near where we found him, and he's acting very strangely. He seems desperate to get into that lot." "I'll be right there," Martinez responded immediately. "Don't let him go into the lot alone, but don't fight him too hard either. He might be trying to show us something. Within minutes, Martinez arrived with Pete Rodriguez, who had volunteered to help with the investigation due to his familiarity with the property and his experience with animals. Emma Harrison had also driven back from Chicago that morning and was staying at a local motel while trying to resolve Rex's custody situation. "What exactly is he doing?" Martinez asked, observing Rex's behavior. "He keeps pulling toward that specific corner of the lot," Sarah explained, pointing to an area near the back where an old refrigerator and some furniture created a makeshift shelter. "It's not where we found him originally. It's a different spot entirely." Pete examined the area Rex was indicating. "That's interesting. That corner has the most debris, including some stuff that's been there for years. If Rex is trying to show us something specific, it would have to be something he knew about before he ended up living in the lot." Officer Martinez made a decision that surprised everyone. "Let's let Rex lead us, but we'll be careful, and if there's any sign of danger, we'll pull back immediately." Rex seemed to understand that he had permission to investigate. With Sarah holding his leash loosely, he moved directly toward the corner of the lot that had captured his attention. His nose was working constantly, and his tail, which had remained tucked for most of his recovery, was now raised with alertness. When Rex reached a pile of debris near an overturned wooden cabinet, he began digging with the focused intensity of a dog who knew exactly what he was looking for. Sarah could see that he was being careful not to damage whatever was buried there, using his paws to gently move dirt and small pieces of trash. "He's found something," Pete announced. Kneeling down to see what Rex had uncovered, what emerged from beneath the debris was a small wooden box, weathered by exposure but still intact. It was the kind of decorative box that might be used to store important papers or keepsakes, with brass hinges that had turned green with age. Officer Martinez carefully extracted the box from its hiding place, while Rex watched with obvious satisfaction, as if he had completed an important task. "This was deliberately buried here," Martinez observed. "Someone wanted to make sure it wouldn't be found accidentally." Emma had been watching the proceedings with growing anxiety. What could be in there? And how did Rex know where to find it? "Dogs have incredible memory for locations," Pete explained. "If Rex saw someone bury this box, he would remember the exact spot even after months or years." Officer Martinez opened the box carefully, mindful that its contents might be important evidence. Inside, protected by plastic bags, were several documents, some old photographs, and what appeared to be legal papers. The first document Martinez examined was a copy of Dorothy Harrison's last will and testament. His expression grew more serious as he read through the contents. "Emma," he said carefully, "this will is different from the one that was filed with the probate court. According to this document, your grandmother left her house, her savings and custody of Rex, specifically to you." Emma stared at the document in shock. "That's impossible. The lawyer handling the estate told me that my grandmother had changed her will shortly before her passing and that I had been removed as a beneficiary due to family disputes." Officer Martinez continued reading through the documents. "There are also some letters here addressed to you, Emma. They're sealed, but the postmarks suggest they were written in the months before your grandmother's passing." Sarah watched this revelation unfold with growing understanding. "Harold Winters," she said slowly. "He was involved in the estate somehow, wasn't he?" "It looks that way," Martinez confirmed. "There are several documents here that suggest Harold was acting as Dorothy's advisor regarding her estate planning. But if this will is authentic, it means the will that was probated was either forged or obtained under false pretenses." Emma was reading one of the letters her grandmother had written, tears streaming down her face. "She says here that she was worried about Harold's influence on some family members. She was afraid that her real will might be hidden or destroyed after her passing. That's why she gave Rex a copy to guard." The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. Rex hadn't just been abandoned in the vacant lot. He had been guarding something that Harold Winters had tried to hide after Dorothy's passing. When Harold disappeared from Cedar Falls, he had left Rex behind, not realizing that the dog would continue to protect the hidden documents, even while struggling to survive. "This changes everything about Rex's custody situation," Dr. Chen said, having arrived after receiving Sarah's call about the discovery. If Dorothy specifically left Rex to Emma in her authentic will, then Emma has a legal claim that supersedes any informal arrangements. But Emma was staring at Rex with a new understanding that went beyond legal ownership. "He's been guarding my grandmother's wishes this whole time. Even while he was starving and alone, he never forgot what she had asked him to protect." Tommy had been unusually quiet during the entire discovery. But now he approached Rex and gently placed his small hand on the dog's head. "Good doggy," he said softly. "Good, Rex." Rex's tail wagged for the first time since his rescue, and he lowered his head to accept Tommy's praise. It was as if the successful completion of his guardian duty had finally allowed him to begin healing from the trauma he had endured. Officer Martinez was examining the other documents in the box. "And there's evidence here of financial fraud and manipulation of elderly people. This investigation is going to expand well beyond Rex's situation. Harold Winters appears to have been involved in a scheme to cheat elderly residents out of their estates." Sarah looked around at the group of people who had been brought together by Tommy's mysterious insistence and Rex's loyal determination. A simple animal rescue had uncovered a complex web of fraud and deception that had affected multiple families in Cedar Falls, but more importantly, it had revealed the extraordinary bond between a dog who had never forgotten his duty and a toddler who had somehow known exactly where to look for help. "What happens now?" Emma asked, still processing the implications of her grandmother's hidden will. Now we make sure that Dorothy Harrison's real wishes are honored," Officer Martinez said firmly, "and we make sure that Rex finally gets the home and family he was meant to have." As they prepared to leave the vacant lot, Sarah noticed that Rex was no longer pulling toward the debris pile. His mission was complete, and for the first time since his rescue, he seemed ready to focus on the future rather than guarding the past. The discovery of Dorothy Harrison's authentic will sent shockwaves through Cedar Falls' small legal community. Within days, Emma found herself meeting with lawyers, probate judges, and investigators as the full scope of Harold Winters' deception became clear. The forged will that had been probated after Dorothy's passing was just one piece of a larger scheme that had affected several elderly residents in the area. Emma had taken a leave of absence from her job in Chicago to deal with the legal complexities, but more importantly, to figure out what was best for Rex. The German Shepherd had been staying at the animal clinic while the adults sorted through the implications of the discovered documents, but Dr. Chen had made it clear that he needed a permanent home soon. Rex has been in limbo for too long. Dr. Chen explained during a meeting that included Emma, Sarah, Officer Martinez, and the clinic's social worker, Janet Morrison. He's physically healthy now, but his emotional recovery depends on stability and consistency. He needs to know where he belongs. Emma had been struggling with the decision more than anyone expected. "I have a legal right to Rex, and I want to honor my grandmother's wishes, but I'm not sure I'm the best person to provide what he needs right now." "What do you mean?" Janet asked. Her professional training focused on ensuring the best outcomes for animals in transition. Emma looked toward the window, where Rex could be seen in the clinic's small exercise yard with Tommy. Sarah brought the little boy for visits every day, and the bond between the toddler and the dog had become even stronger since Rex's successful completion of his guardian mission. "Look at him with Tommy," Emma said softly. "Rex trusts that child in a way he doesn't trust any adult, including me." Tommy was the one who found him, and somehow Tommy understands what Rex needs better than the rest of us do. Sarah felt her heart clench as she realized what Emma might be suggesting. She had grown attached to Rex during his recovery. But more importantly, she had watched Tommy develop a relationship with the dog that seemed to transcend normal pet-owner dynamics. "Emma," Sarah said carefully, "are you thinking about leaving Rex here in Cedar Falls?" "I'm thinking about what my grandmother would have wanted," Emma replied. "She left Rex to me in her will, but she also believed in doing what was best for the animal she loved. If Rex is happier and healthier here, with people who understand his needs, maybe that's what she would have chosen." Officer Martinez had been quietly observing the discussion. "There's another factor to consider. My investigation has revealed that Harold Winters targeted elderly people who lived alone with valuable pets. Rex wasn't just Dorothy's companion, he was her protector. Harold may have seen Rex as an obstacle to his scheme." This revelation added another layer to Rex's story. He hadn't just been abandoned, he had been deliberately removed from a situation where his protective instincts might have interfered with Harold's plans. Dr. Chen joined the conversation with an update on Rex's psychological evaluation. "I've been working with an animal behaviorist from Des Moines. Her assessment is that Rex has formed what she calls a healing attachment with Tommy. It's not uncommon for traumatized animals to bond with children who represent safety and innocence. But Tommy isn't my child," Sarah pointed out. "I'm just his caregiver. His parents would have to agree to any arrangement involving Rex." Emma stood up and walked to the window, watching as Tommy gently brushed Rex's coat with a small brush that Dr. Chen had provided. "Maybe we should ask Tommy's parents to join this conversation. If Rex is going to stay in Cedar Falls, they should be part of the decision-making process." Jennifer and Mark Brennan arrived at the clinic that evening after their work shifts. Both curious and concerned about the situation Sarah had described to them over the phone. They were hard-working people who lived modestly, but had always tried to provide the best possible care for Tommy. "We appreciate that Tommy has helped with Rex's recovery," Jennifer said, settling into one of the clinic's consultation chairs. "But we need to be realistic about our situation. We're renters, we both work full-time, and we've never had a large dog before." Mark nodded in agreement. "Plus, German Shepherds are expensive to maintain. Veterinary bills, food, training if there are behavioral issues. We're already stretched pretty thin financially." Emma had been listening to their concerns with growing determination. What if those issues weren't problems? What if Rex's care was provided for financially? And what if he had a place to live that didn't burden your rental situation? Sarah looked at Emma with surprise. "What are you suggesting?" "My grandmother's house," Emma said simply. "According to the authentic will, I inherited the property. It's been sitting empty for 2 years, but it's structurally sound and has a fenced yard that would be perfect for Rex. And my grandmother left enough money to provide for Rex's care for many years." The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected proposition. Emma was essentially offering to provide a home and financial support for Rex to remain in Cedar Falls near Tommy. "But what about you?" Dr. Chen asked. "Are you planning to move back to Cedar Falls?" Emma shook her head. "My life is in Chicago, my job, my friends, my apartment, but I could visit regularly. And I could make sure that Rex has everything he needs while staying close to the people who helped save him." Jennifer and Mark exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way that long-married couples develop. "We'd need to think about this," Mark said finally. "It's a big responsibility, even with financial support." Tommy, who had been sitting quietly in Sarah's lap, suddenly spoke up with unusual clarity. "Rex stay. Rex and Tommy friends." The simple declaration from the little boy who had started this entire chain of events carried more weight than all the adult discussions that had preceded it. Janet Morrison, the social worker, had been taking notes throughout the conversation. "This is actually not an unusual arrangement," she said. "Guardian situations where the legal owner provides for an animal's care while the daily caregivers handle the relationship management. It can work very well when everyone involved is committed to the animal's welfare." Officer Martinez added his perspective. "From a legal standpoint, Emma's ownership rights are clear. How she chooses to exercise those rights is entirely up to her, as long as Rex's welfare is protected." Dr. Chen stood up and walked to the window where Rex could be seen waiting patiently in his kennel. "There's one more thing we should consider. Rex has been through trauma that makes him especially sensitive to abandonment. Whatever decision we make needs to be permanent. He can't handle being moved around or having his living situation change repeatedly." Emma followed Dr. Chen to the window and studied Rex's expression. The dog was alert and watching the building, as if he knew that important decisions about his future were being made inside. "He deserves stability," Emma said quietly. "He's been loyal and protective for 2 years, while I didn't even know he needed help. The least I can do is make sure he has a real home with people who understand what he's been through." Sarah felt tears building in her eyes as she realized that Emma was prepared to make a significant sacrifice to ensure Rex's happiness. "Emma, this is incredibly generous. But are you sure this is what you want?" "I'm sure it's what my grandmother would have wanted," Emma replied. "She always said that love meant doing what was best for someone, even when it wasn't what you wanted for yourself." As the meeting concluded, everyone agreed to take a few days to consider the practical details of Emma's proposal. But watching Tommy reach toward the window where Rex was waiting, Sarah had the feeling that the little boy who had found Rex in the first place had already made the decision for all of them. Rex belonged in Cedar Falls, with the people who had saved him and the child who had taught him to trust again. The question now was whether the adults involved would be wise enough to recognize that sometimes the most unconventional solutions are the ones that serve everyone's heart. 3 weeks later, on a crisp September morning that carried the first hints of autumn, a small procession made its way down Elm Street toward Dorothy Harrison's house. Emma had spent the intervening time working with contractors to make the house suitable for Rex, installing a new fence, updating the kitchen, and ensuring that everything was ready for the most unusual homecoming Cedar Falls had ever witnessed. Sarah pushed Tommy's stroller while Rex walked beside them on a new leather leash, his coat now gleaming with health and his head held high with a confidence that had been slowly rebuilding since his rescue. Dr. Chen walked alongside them, carrying Rex's medical records and a care plan that would ensure his continued well-being. Pete Rodriguez and Frank Henderson had volunteered to help with the transition, both men having developed a personal investment in Rex's recovery story. The house at 847 Elm Street looked better than it had in years. Emma had hired local workers to restore the garden that Dorothy had loved, repair the front porch where she used to sit with Rex in the evenings, and paint the entire exterior in the soft yellow color that had been Dorothy's favorite. Most importantly, the backyard had been transformed into a paradise for a German shepherd, with new fencing, a comfortable doghouse, and plenty of space for running and playing. Jennifer and Mark Brennan were waiting on the front porch, both of them nervous about the commitment they were making, but certain that it was the right decision for their family. The past weeks had been filled with discussions, planning sessions, and gradual integration visits that had convinced everyone involved that Rex's future lay in Cedar Falls, with the people who had saved him. "Are you ready for this, Rex?" Sarah asked as they approached the house. The dog's tail wagged in response, and he looked up at her with eyes that no longer held the fear and resignation she remembered from that first day in the vacant lot. Emma was waiting in the front yard, her emotions clearly mixed as she prepared to officially transfer Rex's daily care to the Brennan family while maintaining her legal guardianship and financial responsibility. She had made peace with her decision, but saying goodbye to her grandmother's beloved companion was harder than she had anticipated. "He looks wonderful," Emma said, kneeling down to Rex's level. For the first time since their reunion, Rex approached her willingly, allowing her to scratch behind his ears in the way Dorothy had taught her years ago. "I think Grandma Dorothy would be proud of how strong you've become." Tommy wiggled out of his stroller and immediately went to Rex's side, taking his place as the dog's small guardian and protector. The bond between them had deepened during the transition period, with Rex showing a protective instinct toward Tommy that reminded everyone of his years guarding Dorothy. Officer Martinez arrived with an update on the Harold Winters investigation. "We've traced Harold to Nevada, where he was arrested trying to run a similar scheme on elderly residents. The evidence we found in Rex's box was crucial to building the case. Rex didn't just guard your grandmother's will, Emma. He helped us stop Harold from victimizing other families." The revelation added another layer of meaning to Rex's ordeal. His suffering had served a larger purpose, protecting other potential victims from the same deception that had affected Dorothy's estate. Dr. Chen conducted a final examination of Rex in the house where he had lived with Dorothy, noting his calm demeanor and obvious comfort in the familiar environment. "He remembers this place," she observed. "Look how he's checking each room, as if he's reacquainting himself with his territory." Indeed, Rex was moving through the house with purpose, stopping at Dorothy's favorite chair, checking the kitchen where his food bowls had once been placed, and finally settling in the living room where a new dog bed had been positioned near the window. It was the same spot where he had spent countless hours watching the street with Dorothy. Frank Henderson had prepared a small speech for the occasion, but as he watched Rex settle into his new old home, he found himself simply saying, "Welcome home, boy. You've earned it." The afternoon was spent helping Rex readjust to the house and introducing him to the routines that would define his new life. Jennifer and Mark had arranged their work schedules so that Rex would never be alone for more than a few hours, and Sarah would continue bringing Tommy for daily visits during her caregiving duties. As evening approached, Emma prepared to return to Chicago, knowing that this might be her last visit for several months. She sat with Rex in the living room where Dorothy had spent her final years, running her hands through his fur and speaking to him in the soft tones her grandmother had used. "You did your job, Rex," she said quietly. "You protected Grandma's wishes, and you helped us find the truth. Now it's time for you to be happy again." Rex seemed to understand that this was a farewell of sorts. He rested his head on Emma's lap and remained still while she said her goodbye. But his eyes kept tracking to Tommy, who was playing nearby with a new toy that had been chosen specifically for sharing with Rex. The most remarkable moment came when Emma stood to leave. Instead of the anxiety or confusion that might be expected from a dog being left behind again, Rex simply walked to Tommy's side and sat down, as if he was communicating his choice about where he belonged. "He knows," Dr. Chen said softly. "He understands that this isn't abandonment. This is him choosing his family." Sarah felt her heart swell as she watched Tommy wrap his small arms around Rex's neck and whisper, "Good boy, Rex. Stay with Tommy." The goodbye between Emma and Rex was emotional, but peaceful. She kissed the top of his head and whispered a promise to visit soon, then walked to her car without looking back. She had learned from her grandmother that sometimes love means letting go, and she knew that Rex was exactly where he needed to be. As the evening settled over Cedar Falls, the house on Elm Street felt alive again for the first time in 2 years. Rex had claimed his place by the window. Tommy was curled up nearby with a picture book, and Jennifer was preparing dinner in the kitchen that had been Dorothy's domain. Frank Henderson stopped by with a bag of Rex's favorite treats from the market, and Pete Rodriguez delivered a new collar with Rex's name and the Brennan family's contact information, Officer Martinez called to confirm that all the legal paperwork had been filed and that Rex's custody arrangement was officially documented. But the most meaningful moment came when Sarah was preparing to take Tommy home for the night. As she lifted the little boy from where he had been reading to Rex, Tommy looked back at the dog and said with perfect clarity, "And see you tomorrow, Rex. Tommy loves you." Rex's tail wagged as he watched his small friend leave, and for the first time since his rescue, he showed no anxiety about being separated from the people he trusted. He knew they would return. Dr. Chen made her final check of the evening, confirming that Rex was settling well and that all his needs were being met. "This is exactly what recovery looks like," she told the Brennan family. "And Rex has gone from surviving to living. That's the best outcome we could have hoped for." As the house grew quiet and Rex settled into his bed near the window, he could see the street where his ordeal had begun and his rescue had unfolded. But instead of looking backward, his attention was focused on the future and the sound of Tommy's laughter that still echoed in his memory. The little boy who had somehow known exactly where to look for help had given Rex something more precious than rescue. He had given him a reason to trust again, a purpose beyond survival, and a family that understood that love sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms. Rex closed his eyes in the house where Dorothy had loved him, surrounded by new people who had chosen to love him too, and dreamed of tomorrow's adventures with the child who had saved his life by simply pointing toward hope. The story that had begun with a moment of mysterious intuition had ended with a homecoming that proved that sometimes the most broken things can be made whole again when the right hearts come together at exactly the right time. As word of Rex's story spread throughout Cedar Falls and beyond, it became a reminder that courage comes in all sizes, that healing is possible even after the deepest trauma, and that the bonds between souls transcend the boundaries we think separate us from one another. For those who witnessed Tommy and Rex's extraordinary connection, it became a story they would tell for years to come, about the day a toddler's pointing finger led to a discovery that changed multiple lives and proved that love truly does find a way. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Tommy, Rex, Emma, and the entire Cedar Falls community has touched your hearts as much as it has touched ours. This tale of unexpected connections, second chances, and the healing power of love reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes in our lives begin with the smallest gestures of compassion. If you've been moved by Rex's journey from abandonment to belonging, and Tommy's intuitive wisdom that led to a miracle, we invite you to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary bonds between humans and the animals who share our world. Please leave a like if this story resonated with you, and share in the comments your own experiences with the special connections that have changed your life. Every day, we bring you new stories that explore the depth of love, loyalty, and hope that exists in our world. Don't miss our upcoming tales of courage, healing, and the beautiful complexity of life's unexpected gifts. We look forward to continuing this journey with you.